The first sound wasn't a footstep, nor a voice. It was the wind. A cold, persistent wind sweeping across the main street of that small town in the American Midwest, as if searching for something that had also been forgotten. It made the dry branches of the trees rustle against each other, produced a low whistle among the old buildings, and tore dead leaves from the ground, swirling them in slow, almost respectful circles. It was the kind of silence that only exists in towns too small for the world to care about, where time doesn't run. It drags. And in that heavy, almost suffocating silence, there was a man standing. Gordon stood motionless under the dim light of an old lamppost, its bulb flickering erratically, like a weary heart refusing to stop. He kept his hands in the pockets of his worn coat, his shoulders slightly hunched from the cold. But his posture still carried something rigid, too disciplined to be ordinary. Gordon was a war veteran. It wasn't something he said, nor something anyone asked. It was something seen in the details, in the way he surveyed his surroundings before moving, in the way his gaze never fully rested, in the constant tension in his jaw, as if he were always prepared for an order that would never come. The city continued its indifferent routine. A car passed slowly, its headlights illuminating Gordon for a brief second, before continuing on without slowing down. A woman left a shop, locked the door, and walked hurriedly, oblivious to the man under the lamppost. To everyone there, Gordon was just another body occupying space. For Gordon, every sound, every shadow, every movement carried meaning. Years of war don't disappear when the uniform is folded and stored away. They seep into the skin, the bones, the breath. Gordon was a war veteran trying to exist in a place that no longer knew how to see him. The icy air cut into his lungs, carrying with it the smell of cold asphalt, old metal, and damp wood. Yet, mixed in with all of that, came another odor, non-existent to anyone else, but vivid to him. The smell of memory, gunpowder, dust, fear. Gordon blinked slowly, as if trying to push away images that threatened to form. He had learned on the battlefield that a few seconds of distraction could cost lives. That reflex never left him. Even there, on that quiet street, he remained alert. War veterans don't switch off. They just learn to endure. The distant sound of a train cut through the air, long and deep, vibrating in Gordon's chest like an echo from another time. His muscles reacted before his mind, an automatic, almost imperceptible impulse. During the war, sounds like that meant displacement, retreat, imminent danger. Now they were just part of the daily life of that forgotten city. Still, his heart pounded for a few moments. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, counting mentally, an old technique, learned to maintain control when everything around him crumbled. When he opened his eyes, the world was still there. The same cracked asphalt, the same old facades, the same heavy sky painted in shades of gray and dark blue, as if night were falling earlier than it should. The lights from the shops reflected in the puddles left by an old rain, creating distorted, almost unreal images. Gordon observed everything with silent attention, like someone who had already seen normality transform into chaos in a matter of seconds. He was a war veteran, and the world had never again seemed completely safe to him. He began to walk. Each step was firm, measured, conscious. His boots touched the ground with a dry, rhythmic sound, almost like a slowed march. Gordon passed a small cafe where the smell of stale coffee escaped through the poorly sealed door. Inside, a few people chatted quietly, laughing at something trivial. None of them looked outside. None noticed the war veteran passing a few meters away, carrying a pass too heavy to put into words. As he approached the central square, Gordon slowed his pace. In the center, there was a simple memorial made of light-colored stone, with names engraved that time was beginning to erase. He knew this kind of place. He had seen many like it, scattered throughout the country, all trying to summarize entire lives in a few cold letters. Gordon stopped before the memorial, the wind making his coat flutter slightly. He reached out and touched the stone. It was cold, solid, real, unlike memories which never allowed themselves to be touched. A tightness formed in his chest, silent, deep. Gordon swallowed hard. There were no tears, only a constant pressure as if something were trapped inside him, searching for a way out that it never found. He didn't read the names aloud. He didn't need to. Their weight was enough. War veterans carry invisible lists within them, names, faces, voices that never disappear. That's when he felt it. He didn't see it. He didn't hear it. He felt it. A subtle change in the air, an almost imperceptible tension. The same kind of feeling that preceded ambushes, irreversible decisions. Moments that divided life into before and after. Gordon straightened his shoulders slightly, his gaze becoming even more attentive. Something was about to happen. He didn't know what. He only knew that that feeling never failed. The city continued to ignore his presence. The lights kept turning on. People continued going about their lives. But under that heavy sky, a war veteran walked, carrying not only the past but also the premonition that his anonymity was coming to an end. Gordon took another deep breath and moved forward, unaware that a single detail, small, almost invisible, was about to change everything. On that silent night, in that city that pretended not to see him, fate finally began to look upon Gordon. And before this story goes any further, let me ask you something simple. If you're feeling this silence, this weight in the air, it's because this story has already caught up with you. Stories like this only stay alive when someone on the other side decides to stay. So, if this war veteran has already sparked something in you, a like is the quietest way to say, I'm here. And if you want to walk to the end of this journey, subscribing to the channel is like sitting down and listening to the story until the very last word. It's not about numbers, it's about company. Because no one should go through a war or a story alone. Gordon woke up every day before sunrise, not out of necessity, but out of habit. His body had never forgotten what it was like to be jolted from sleep by an urgent alarm, by a firm voice announcing that it was time to move or die. Even now, in that small rented house on the outskirts of the city, the silence of the early morning was broken by the simple fact that he was already awake, eyes wide open, staring at the stained ceiling as if it were an ancient map of hostile territory. Gordon was a war veteran, and true rest had never found him again. The house was simple, almost Spartan. A worn sofa, a small table, 2 chairs that were rarely used at the same time. No photographs on the walls, no object that betrayed deep ties to that place. Everything there seemed temporary, as if Gordon were only passing through, even after months, perhaps years, of living there. War veterans learn not to get too attached. Attachment hurts when everything can be lost in seconds. He rose slowly, his knees silently protesting. Physical reminders of a body once pushed beyond its limits. He always made coffee the same way, measuring the water, waiting for the exact time, as if each small ritual were an attempt to maintain control over something. The strong aroma filled the air, bringing a brief sense of normalcy. Gordon held the mug with both hands, as if the warmth were an anchor, keeping him grounded in the present. When he left home, the city was already beginning to awaken. Gordon walked the same streets every day, following an almost invisible routine. He would pass by the grocery store where Molly worked at the cash register, always with a kind smile that never went beyond the counter. She would say, "Good morning," as she would to any other customer, without knowing or without imagining that the man in front of her was a war veteran who carried enough stories to fill an entire life. Gordon would respond with a slight nod, saving words like someone conserving ammunition. The neighbors knew him only by sight. A quiet man, polite, reserved. Some whispered, others simply ignored him. In small towns, silence is also a form of judgment. Gordon felt it, but didn't react. He had faced worse than curious glances or unasked questions. Still, the feeling of not belonging slowly seeped in, corroding him from within. War veterans often return home only to discover that the concept of home is stuck in the past. During the day, Gordon did odd jobs, simple repairs, temporary services, nothing that required lasting commitments. He preferred it that way. Prolonged relationships meant questions, expectations, emotional involvement, and that was dangerous territory. Gordon spoke little, but observed a great deal. He noticed details that no one else did. Unlocked doors, strange movements, hidden tensions in simple gestures. The training never left him. Even at peace, he remained at war with himself. At night, the weight increased. The silence of the city grew denser, almost deafening. Gordon sat on the porch, gazing at the empty street, listening to distant sounds. A dog barking, a car passing, the wind rustling through the trees. Each noise had the potential to transform into something bigger within his mind. He breathed deeply, trying to stay in the present. But the past had a cruel way of creeping in when everything became too quiet. There were nights when he couldn't sleep. He would just sit there, staring into the darkness, fighting off memories that came uninvited. They weren't complete images, but fragments. Voices, expressions, decisions made in seconds that changed everything. Gordon was a war veteran, living in a city that slept peacefully, unaware of how much that tranquility had cost people like him. He rarely spoke about the past. When someone asked, he would answer with short, generic phrases. "I worked abroad. It was a long time ago." It was easier that way. People would thank him, say something polite, and move on. Gordon stayed. He always stayed. With the unspoken words, with the stories that no one seemed to really want to hear. Even so, there were small moments of humanity. A discreet wave from Whitney as she drove by. A brief greeting from Landon, the local mechanic, who respected Gordon's silence without trying to fill it. These minimal gestures were enough to remind him that he was still part of the world, even if on the margins. War veterans learn to value the little things, because so much has already been taken from them before. Gordon ended his days the same way he began them, in silence. Lying in bed, eyes open, waiting for sleep to come as one waits for an uncertain ceasefire. Sometimes it came, sometimes it didn't. But every night carried the same silent truth. He had survived the war, but he was still learning to survive the peace. And in that seemingly unchanging routine, something invisible began to stir, preparing the ground for a shock that would shatter the fragile balance of his solitary life. Long before he was a war veteran, before his eyes bore a weariness that no night's sleep could erase, Gordon was just a boy growing up in a small town, too similar to the one where he now tried to survive. The memory of that time came to him gently, almost painfully, like something too fragile to be touched for long. Still, when the past called to him, he answered in silence. Gordon was born in a simple, light-colored wooden house, surrounded by tall trees and open fields that seemed to stretch to infinity. His father woke up early every day, a man of few words and calloused hands, who believed that character was built with hard work and responsibility. His mother had a calm voice, an attentive gaze, and a particular way of making the house seem a safe place, even when the world outside seemed unstable. It was there that Gordon learned the meaning of duty, respect, and silence. Lessons that would stay with him throughout his life. In his childhood, he spent hours playing outside, inventing imaginary battles with branches that became rifles and stones that marked invisible borders. There was something in Gordon that always sought order in chaos, strategy in improvisation. Yet, back then, everything was light, or was just a distant idea, something seen in old movies or heard in hushed conversations between adults. Gordon never imagined that one day he would know the true weight of those words. At school, he wasn't the most popular, but he wasn't invisible either. He had few friends, among them Connor, who lived 2 streets down and shared the same sense of quiet curiosity. They talked about everything and nothing, wandered aimlessly through the city, dreaming of a future that seemed too big to fit there. Gordon wanted to see the world. He wanted to prove to himself that he was capable of something greater. This desire grew with him, fueled by stories of courage, honor, and sacrifice that he heard from older veterans at local parades and community events. When adolescence arrived, the world began to change. His father aged too quickly. The house became quieter. Responsibilities came early. Gordon took on small jobs, helping as he could, learning to put the needs of others before his own. It was during this period that he began to feel the weight of expectations, to be someone, to do something that mattered, to protect what he loved. For many young people in small towns, the future seemed limited. For Gordon, military service appeared as a clear, almost inevitable path. He remembered perfectly the day he made the decision. He was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, when he heard a news report on the radio about conflicts on the other side of the world. It wasn't fear he felt. It was a silent calling. The feeling that he could be useful, that he could be part of something bigger than himself. Gordon wasn't seeking glory, he was seeking purpose. And at that moment, he believed he would find it wearing a uniform. The conversation with his family was difficult. His mother tried to hide her tears, asking if there wasn't another option. His father remained silent for a long time, until he placed his hand on Gordon's shoulder and said simply, "Do it right, and come back." Those words became a commitment. Gordon left, carrying with him the hope that he would return the same man, only more experienced. He didn't know, no one knows, the true price that war exacts. Before boarding, there were farewells. Connor squeezed his hand tightly, promising that everything would still be there, waiting for him. There were unfulfilled dreams, interrupted conversations, possibilities suspended in time. Gordon carried all of that with him, believing that the past would remain intact while he was away. War veterans almost always discover too late that time waits for no one. During training, Gordon stood out. Discipline, focus, resilience. Everything he had learned in childhood found a concrete place there. He felt prepared, confident, even proud. For the first time, he felt he belonged to something. The other soldiers became makeshift brothers, united by a common goal. Still, there were nights when he remembered the wooden house, the smell of coffee in the morning, the aimless walks with Connor. These memories were anchors, keeping him human amidst the transformation. Gordon went to war believing he could separate who he was from what he would do. He believed he could return and pick up his life where he left off. That was the biggest mistake of all. Because before the war, Gordon was a young man full of expectations, solid values, and an open future. Afterward, he would become a war veteran, and nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the abysmal distance between these two versions of himself. And yet, in that time before the conflict, there was purity. There was intention. There was a man who believed that doing the right thing always led to a just ending. That version of Gordon still existed somewhere within him, silent, waiting for the chance to emerge again, even after all that the war would do to try to erase it. War didn't enter Gordon's life all at once. It infiltrated gradually, silently at first, almost respectfully, as if testing how far it could go before fully revealing itself. In the beginning, there was movement, clear orders, defined objectives. Everything seemed logical. Gordon believed it. He believed that if he followed the training, if he trusted the chain of command, if he did everything right, he would get through that hell unscathed. This thought is common in men who don't yet know that war doesn't negotiate. The first impact wasn't an explosion, nor a shootout. It was the gaze of a civilian standing by the roadside, watching the train pass. An empty, old gaze, too tired to feel fear. This disconcerted Gordon more than any combat simulation. For the first time, he realized that this war wasn't an isolated event, but a permanent state for many people. Even so, he pressed on. War veterans are born from the continuous act of moving forward, even when doubt begins to gnaw at them from within. Over time, the days began to blend together. Excessive heat, constant dust, short nights. Gordon learned to sleep in broken intervals, always alert. His body adapted, but his mind began to register every detail with cruel clarity. Sounds became threats. Silences became warnings. He began to measure the world in terms of potential risks. There was no trauma yet, only tension. The trauma would come later, when the brain began to relive what the body had only managed to endure once. There were names, there are always names, men with whom Gordon shared quick meals, nervous jokes, confidences whispered in the dark. One of them was Landon, older, experienced, someone who exuded security simply by being present. Another was Connor. Not the same one from childhood, but someone who carried the same kind of lightness rare in hostile environments. They talked about going home, about simple things like driving without looking in the rearview mirrors every second. These conversations created the illusion of normalcy. War allows this for brief moments, only to make the loss more profound afterward. The moment that changed everything didn't come with a warning. It never does. It was a decision made too quickly in a situation that was too confusing. Gordon still remembered the exact feeling. Time slowing down, his heart pounding in his ears, the world reduced to immediate choices. He did what he was trained to do. He survived, and in that very instant, he lost something he would never get back. After that, nothing was ever the same. Gordon continued carrying out missions, continued following orders, continued breathing, but something inside him had shifted. The war ceased to be external. It began to exist inside his head. He started waking up before dawn, not out of discipline, but because sleep brought images he couldn't control. Faces appeared without context. Voices called his name. Some he recognized. Others he didn't. War veterans quickly learned to hide these things. Gordon learned to smile when he needed to say everything was all right, to function. He functioned during the day. At night, the silence turned into a minefield. One sound out of place, a specific smell, a change in the light, and he was no longer there. He was back, always back. There was guilt. Not the obvious guilt, but the deeper kind, difficult to explain. The guilt of having survived when others did not. The guilt of having made the right choices that led to the wrong results. The guilt of not being able to remember everything clearly, but remembering too much at the same time. Gordon carried this alone because war teaches you to resist, not to ask for help. When the return finally happened, there were applause, speeches, thanks. Gordon heard it all as if he were behind thick glass. The words didn't reach where he truly was. He was officially a war veteran, but no one explained how to live after that. No one taught him how to switch off the alert, how to trust the silence again, how to sleep without fighting his own mind. The marks weren't on his body, they were in his reflexes, in his involuntary startle, in his gaze that wandered to distant places, in his discomfort with crowds, in the difficulty of explaining why certain songs tightened his chest, or why he avoided fireworks. Gordon was a war veteran walking through a world that moved on without realizing how much he was still trapped in another time. Some memories came as disconnected fragments, others as whole waves. There were days when he felt empty, disconnected. On others, he felt everything at once, unfiltered, defenseless. The trauma didn't ask permission, it simply surfaced. Gordon learned to live with it in the only way he knew, in silence, remaining functional, believing that enduring was the same as healing. But the war doesn't end when it's over. For Gordon, it continued to live on, echoing in every choice, in every avoided relationship, in every sleepless night. He survived the battlefield. He became a war veteran, and he paid the invisible price that few see, but which defines every step he has taken since then. For a long time, Gordon believed his life would continue that way until the end. Identical days, long nights, enough silence to keep the past contained, but never distant. He had accepted that existence as a kind of silent punishment, surviving when so many did not. Nothing indicated that anything could still break that carefully constructed routine. Nothing until that gray morning, when fate decided to knock on his door discreetly, almost politely, like everything that truly changes a life. The day began like any other. Gordon woke before sunrise, made his coffee, sat at the small table staring blankly into space as steam slowly rose from his mug. Outside, the city was waking lazily, no urgency, no obvious omen. Yet there was a strange unease in the air, something he couldn't name, but which kept his shoulders tense. War veterans learn to respect this kind of feeling, even when they can't explain it. When he opened the door to get the newspaper, something was out of place. A brown envelope lay on the porch floor. There was no visible stamp, no return address, only his name handwritten in firm, decisive letters. Gordon stood there for a few seconds, observing it as if it were an unknown artifact. His heart slowed, then accelerated in a controlled manner. He bent down slowly, picking up the envelope as if handling something potentially dangerous. Inside, there was only a sheet of paper, folded once. No introduction, no explanation. Just a short sentence, written in the same firm handwriting. "If you're still the man you were in the war, I need you." Gordon felt the impact of those words like a silent blow to the chest. The war. No one in that city spoke to him about it. No one used that word in that way. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control his body's automatic reaction. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from recognition. That phrase was no ordinary request. It was a direct call to the man he was trying to keep buried. On the back of the paper was an address. It wasn't far. An old house near the secondary road that led out of town. Gordon knew the place by sight. He always passed by, but had never stopped. He sat at the table for long minutes, the envelope open before him, the coffee already cold. The rational part of his mind told him to ignore it, to tear up the paper, to move on. The part that had been shaped on the battlefield told him that ignoring such a call was never an option. Later that day, while walking through town trying to decide what to do, Gordon ran into Molly at the grocery store. She mentioned, almost casually, that something strange had happened the previous night near that road. Noise, shouts, a car speeding away. No one called the police, no one wanted to get involved. Gordon listened silently, feeling the pieces begin to fall into place in an uncomfortably strange way. This was no coincidence. As he left the store, he saw Aretha sitting on a bench near the square, staring at the ground. She was one of the few people who occasionally exchanged a few extra words with him. When their eyes met, she hesitated, then said in a low voice that a young woman from the town, Whitney, hadn't been seen since the previous night. People murmured, but no one seemed willing to act. She probably ran away, some said. Gordon felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd heard that kind of excuse before, many times. Always before it was too late. That night was unlike any other. Gordon couldn't stay home. The envelope felt like a living object, weighing heavily in his coat pocket. He wandered aimlessly for hours, the cold wind whipping against his face, his mind in turmoil. He wasn't the same man anymore, at least that's what he told himself. But the world seemed determined to remind him of who he had been, and what he was still capable of. When he finally approached the indicated address, the sky was already dark. The house was old, isolated, with peeling paint and lights out. Gordon stopped across the street, observing, assessing, calculating. The war veteran within him fully awakened. There was no rush, but there was urgency. He noticed recent marks on the floor, a half-open window, subtle signs that something was wrong. Details that would go unnoticed by any other resident of that city. That's when he heard it. A low, muffled sound, almost swallowed by the wind. It wasn't a clear cry for help. It was something worse. A sound that contained despair. Gordon closed his eyes for a second, feeling the weight of the decision forming. He could leave. He could pretend he never received that letter. He could continue being just an ignored man in a small town. But the war had taught him something that never left him. When someone calls, and you have the ability to answer, the choice defines who you are. Gordon took a deep breath, adjusted his coat, and took his first step toward that house. At that moment, his life ceased to be merely about survival. The calling event had served its purpose. The war veteran was back on the front lines, not for glory, not out of obligation, but because deep down, he had never stopped being that man. Gordon stood before the house long enough for any other man to have left. The cold seeped into his coat, the wind whispered against the old wood, and the darkness seemed to watch back. He felt no hurry, because war veterans learn that acting too quickly is often as dangerous as not acting at all. His body was still, but inside, everything functioned with precision. Every breath was measured, every sound was analyzed, every shadow had weight. This wasn't nostalgia for combat, it was survival applied consciously. He closed his eyes for a second, not to run away, but to align what he felt with what he needed to do. The fear was there, silent, controlled. Gordon knew that courage is not the absence of fear, it's a decision despite it. The war veteran within him recognized the terrain, even if it was an ordinary house in a forgotten town. The principle was the same. Entering meant taking responsibility for everything that came after. Gordon walked slowly around the side of the house, feeling the texture of the wall under his fingers, testing each point of support before shifting his weight. He avoided making noise not just out of technique, but out of respect for the situation. Someone there was already too scared. He wouldn't be another threat. The half-open window confirmed what he already suspected. Someone had entered without intending to be seen. Gordon stopped, listened. The sound returned, a low noise, almost a stifled cry, frequently interrupted as if the person was trying not to be heard. That attempt to silence his own despair struck Gordon differently. On the battlefield, he had heard many sounds like that, always before something irreversible. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the windowsill, and pushed open the window with just enough care not to crack the wood. He went inside. The interior was dark, stuffy, and smelled of abandonment. He remained motionless for a few seconds, allowing his eyes to adjust. A war veteran doesn't run into the unknown. He observes until the unknown reveals itself. The narrow corridor ahead seemed longer than it actually was. Each step demanded his full attention. Gordon moved with his body slightly inclined, ready to react, but without aggression. He wasn't there to punish anyone. He was there to prevent something worse from happening. As he approached the door at the end of the corridor, the sound became clearer. It was human. It was real. Gordon felt his stomach clench, not from fear, but from recognition. That was the reason. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside the room, he saw Whitney sitting on the floor, her hands bound, her face etched with suppressed panic. Her eyes immediately snapped up, wide and wary. Gordon carefully raised his hands, showing that he wasn't carrying anything that could hurt her. He spoke softly, with an unpretentious calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The sentence wasn't grand. It was necessary. He kept his distance, respecting her space, because he knew that fear doesn't disappear just because someone says everything is all right. Before he could get any closer, Gordon heard footsteps in the other room. Slow, uneven. Someone was there. The war veteran felt his body automatically adjust its posture, but his mind remained focused on one thing: preventing the situation from escalating. He positioned himself so that he was visible, not hidden. When the man appeared, Gordon maintained eye contact, without challenge, without submission, just presence. He spoke first. Not loudly, not aggressively. He said few words, carefully chosen. Simple, direct sentences that left no room for confusion, but also did not provoke. He used something he had learned far beyond military training: reading people. The other man was nervous, disorganized, trying to maintain control over something that was already slipping away. Gordon knew that brute force at that moment could put Whitney at risk. When the sudden movement came, Gordon was already prepared. There was no gratuitous violence, there was precise intervention, a quick movement, firm control, using his own body weight to neutralize without crushing. Gordon immobilized the man efficiently, without hatred, without unnecessary words. The war veteran wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to finish. In a few seconds, everything was under control. The silence that followed was heavy, but different. Gordon held the man down until he was sure there was no further threat. Then he cautiously stepped back and turned his attention to Whitney. He knelt slowly, keeping his voice low, explaining each movement before making it. He untied her hands carefully, avoiding any sudden movements. When he offered her his coat, he did so as someone who understands that small gestures can mean safety. Whitney was trembling. Gordon didn't try to rush the moment. He remained there, steady, present. There was no rush for heroism, only for humanity. When he helped her to her feet, he stayed by her side, between her and any other threatening stimulus. Outside, voices began to emerge. Someone had called the police. The city was beginning to awaken to something it had ignored. As he left the house, Gordon felt something different in his chest. It wasn't complete relief. It wasn't peace. It was purpose. He hadn't resolved his traumas. He hadn't erased the war. But he had chosen to act despite them. The war veteran had used everything he had learned not to destroy, but to protect. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Gordon wasn't defined by what he had survived, but by what he had decided to do with it. What followed wasn't silence, it was weight. A weight unlike anything Gordon had ever carried. When the lights of the vehicles cut through the darkness and the voices began to fill the air, something inside him clenched tightly. It wasn't fear of the police, nor regret for what he had done. It was the clear realization that, by acting, He had broken the invisible agreement he had with that city, the agreement to be ignored. From that moment on, Gordon was no longer just the silent war veteran who went unnoticed. He was someone who had interfered, and interfering always comes at a price. As Whitney was led away, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by questions, Gordon remained a few steps behind, watching. He didn't approach. He didn't seek recognition. Part of him wanted to disappear back into the darkness, to return to the safe routine of anonymity. Another part, older, firmer, knew that this was no longer possible. The greater conflict wasn't outside. It was within him, between the man who had learned to hide to survive and the war veteran who had always been trained to advance when others retreated. In the following days, the city changed subtly, but noticeably. Gazes lingered longer. Whispers arose when Gordon passed by. Some carried curiosity, others, suspicion. There was also silent gratitude, the kind that doesn't know how to express itself. Gordon felt all of this as constant pressure. War veterans are sensitive to changes in their environment. He knew he was being watched, evaluated, not as a hero, but as something undefined, out of place. The nights grew worse. Sleep, already fragile, became a battlefield. Gordon would wake with his heart racing, reliving past decisions mixed with the recent one, Whitney's face blurred with others. The dark corridor transformed into foreign alleyways. He would get up sweating, breathing deeply, trying to remember where he was. The peace he had felt after the act of courage began to crack, giving way to a corrosive doubt. What if that had been the beginning of something he couldn't control? There was also the silent fear of failure. Not that night, but from then on. Gordon knew he couldn't save everyone. He knew that better than anyone. The war had taught him that lesson in the cruelest way possible. Still, the city now seemed to expect something from him. Small comments surfaced. People came to him with trivial problems, as if he had become an improvised solution for everything that was out of place. Gordon felt the weight of these expectations as a growing burden. The conflict deepened when he received a visit from Landon, the mechanic. There were no accusations or exaggerated praise, just an honest conversation. Landon said the town was divided. Some saw Gordon as someone who had done what needed to be done. Others thought he had brought trouble to a place that preferred to pretend it didn't exist. Gordon listened in silence, feeling a familiar sense of being caught between two worlds. In war, decisions always had consequences. In peace, the consequences were slower, and sometimes more cruel. The greatest conflict, however, came from within. Gordon began to question his own motivation. Had he helped because it was the right thing to do, or because he needed to prove to himself that he still had value? These questions tormented him in his quietest hours. War veterans have a complex relationship with usefulness. When combat ends, many feel they have lost their purpose. Gordon feared he was seeking danger simply to feel alive again. Aretha was one of the few who noticed the strain before it became too visible. In a short conversation, she said something simple. "You don't have to carry this alone." The phrase echoed in Gordon's mind for days. He wanted to believe her, but asking for help was always the hardest part. In war, depending on others meant absolute trust. After it, it meant vulnerability. And vulnerability had always been dangerous territory for him. The major conflict reached its peak when Gordon realized that the man he had immobilized was not alone. There were connections, untold stories, people who preferred that certain things remain hidden. He began to notice strange movements, cars passing too slowly, glances that were not merely curious. The threat was no longer immediate, but constant. An invisible pressure, reminding him that action always has a cost. Gordon faced the most difficult decision since returning from the war. Retreat or continue? Retreating meant protecting himself, preserving what little balance he still had. Continuing meant facing not only external dangers, but his own emotional limits. The war veteran knew this moment. It was the same point where many broke down, not from violence, but from exhaustion. Sitting alone at home in the dark, Gordon stared at his own reflection in the window. He saw there not only the man he was, but all the men he had been. The child full of dreams, the young man who believed in purpose, the soldier who learned to survive, the veteran who tried to disappear. The greater conflict wasn't about the city. It was about accepting that he could no longer pretend he was outside of history. And in recognizing this, Gordon understood something painful and inevitable. The real battle had never ended. It had only changed form. And now, for the first time, he would have to face it without a uniform, without clear orders, with only his own conscience as a guide. The rupture didn't come as a surprise. There were no screams, no sirens, no confrontation outside. It came in the most dangerous way possible for someone like Gordon, silent, internal, inevitable. It happened one early morning when the world seemed finally at peace, while he, a war veteran, was fighting the toughest battle since returning home. Gordon awoke suddenly, his body stiff, his muscles contracted as if he were still lying on hard ground, far away. His heart was pounding too hard for such a small room. The air felt short, insufficient. He lay motionless for a few seconds, trying to get his bearings, trying to convince himself that he was safe. The stained ceiling was above him, familiar, still. Yet the feeling was one of being surrounded not by visible enemies but by memories that respected neither time nor distance. He sat on the bed, his feet resting on the cold floor, and remained there, breathing deeply, counting mentally as he had done in the war. 1, 2, 3. Inhale, exhale. But the method failed. For the first time in a long time, it didn't work. The war veteran perceived this with a different kind of fear, deeper than any external threat. Because when techniques fail, all that remains is the naked man facing everything he had avoided feeling. Gordon stood up and walked to the bathroom. He turned on the light and stared at himself in the mirror. The reflection seemed out of place in time. The face watching him bore too many marks for someone who was supposedly at peace. The eyes were red, sunken, as if they had spent the entire night on watch, and in a way they had. He rested his hands on the sink, feeling the weight of his own body, feeling more tired than on any mission he had ever faced. Then a distant sound broke through the early morning, a metallic crack coming from the street. Nothing significant, an object falling, a door slamming. But for Gordon, it was enough. The sound pierced his mind like a blade. The bathroom disappeared, the house disappeared, the city disappeared. He was back on the battlefield. The heat was stifling. The air was heavy, thick with dust. The silence that precedes chaos spread all around. Gordon felt the weight of the equipment, the sweat trickling down his neck, the collective tension that no soldier needs to verbalize to understand. He heard familiar voices, some trying to maintain lightness, others excessively calm, the kind of calm born from deep fear. The war veteran recognized that moment with painful clarity. It was the instant before everything went wrong. And then, as always happened in her nightmares, the memory didn't follow a logical order. It jumped straight to the aftermath, the floor, the smell of metal, the silence broken by irregular breaths. Connor, the Connor of the war, fallen, too still. Gordon tried to move, tried to speak, tried to shout orders that no longer mattered, but his body seemed trapped, as if the world had decided to punish him with the impossibility of acting. The feeling of powerlessness spread, overwhelming, familiar. He had survived. Again. And again, it seemed unfair. Gordon blinked hard, and the bathroom reappeared. But something had changed. The war veteran felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, his body heavy and without resistance. He rested his head against the cold wall, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, stopped fighting what was coming. His defenses crumbled all at once, not gradually, not uncontrollably. The images he had pushed to the back of his mind for so long came to light. The sounds came, the decisions made in seconds that cost entire lives came to light. The names he never uttered aloud came to light. The questions he never dared to fully formulate came to light. Why did I come back? Why not them? How many times can I survive before this means something else? Whitney's face flashed through his mind, mingled with the faces of other people he had tried to help, protect, save, not always successfully. The responsibility he felt began to distort, transforming into absolute guilt, an irrational yet powerful guilt. The idea that if he was still alive, it was because something was wrong, that perhaps his existence was a prolonged mistake. The tears came without warning. Gordon didn't try to hold them back. He had no energy left. He wept silently, his shoulders trembling, his breath failing. He wept for what he had lost in the war. He wept for the man he had been before it. He wept for the wasted years trying to disappear. He wept for the solitude he had chosen as a form of self-protection. He wept for the deep fear that, now that he had been seen, he wouldn't be able to live up to what was expected of him. The war veteran felt something break definitively inside him. It wasn't just sadness. It was exhaustion. A weariness that can't be resolved with rest. The feeling that continuing like this required more strength than he possessed. For the first time, a dangerous thought formed clearly enough to frighten him. Perhaps he wasn't strong enough to continue carrying all of this alone. It wasn't a desire to die. It was something quieter and more terrifying. The desire to disappear, to return to total invisibility, to not be needed, to not be remembered. Because not being seen meant not failing, not disappointing, not losing anyone else. Dawn began to slowly illuminate the room, the pale light filtering through the window like a gentle intruder. Gordon remained seated on the floor for a long time, not knowing how long. His body ached, his eyes burned, his mind was exhausted. The rupture hadn't completely destroyed him, but it had left him exposed, without the layers of control that had kept him functional. And it was in this state of collapse that something unexpected happened. It wasn't hope. It wasn't relief. It was lucidity. The painful realization that surviving wasn't enough. That continuing to breathe didn't mean being alive. That the war might be over, but he needed to decide, right then and there, whether he would continue to allow it to define everything that remained of his life. Gordon, the war veteran, remained there, broken but conscious. And in that moment of total rupture, something fragile and essential was born. The certainty that he couldn't go on like that. Something had to change, even if he didn't yet know how. The overcoming didn't begin with force. It began with a silent, almost imperceptible decision made by a man sitting on the cold floor of a simple house, while the morning light streamed through the window uninvited. Gordon remained there long after the sun had risen. His body ached, his mind was exhausted, but something had shifted within him. The breakup of the previous night hadn't destroyed him. I had exposed him, yes, but I had also made space for him. Gordon stood up slowly, like someone relearning how to occupy their own body. He made coffee, not out of habit, but out of a need to anchor himself in the present. The strong smell filled the house, bringing with it an old, almost forgotten memory of normalcy. He held the mug firmly, feeling the warmth in his hands, reminding himself where he was. Now. Here. Safe. The war veteran still existed within him, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone in command. Throughout that day, Gordon realized something bigger was stirring around him. It wasn't just internal. The city had changed too. Whitney had spoken. Details began to emerge. The man he had immobilized was only a part of something larger, a silent web of abuse, omissions, and complicity that thrived precisely because no one wanted to look closely. Gordon recognized this pattern with painful clarity. In war, danger rarely comes alone. Here, it was no different. The climax wasn't a single explosive event. It was a sequence of difficult choices made under increasing pressure. Gordon began to be followed. Cars slowed down as they passed his house. Stares that didn't waver. Indirect messages, veiled threats. Nothing explicit enough to warrant immediate alarm, but clear enough for someone trained. The war veteran knew exactly what it meant. They were testing his limits, hoping he would back down. The conflict reached its peak when Gordon was approached directly on a night when the city seemed quieter than it should have been. Two men, no uniforms, no visible weapons, just words carefully chosen to sound like advice. This isn't your problem. You've done enough. Some things need to stay as they are. Gordon listened silently, his body alert, his mind racing. He knew this was the final line. To retreat now would mean surrendering not only Whitney, but himself. The decision came clearly, firmly, without hesitation. Gordon didn't respond with threats. He responded with truth. He said he had lived too long ignoring what was wrong for convenience. He said he knew the cost of acting and the cost of not acting. And above all, he made it clear that he was no longer alone, because that was the crucial difference. For the first time since the war, he wasn't carrying everything in silence. In the following days, Gordon cooperated with the authorities, even knowing that this exposed him even more. Each deposition was a plunge into tension, each conversation a test of emotional resilience. But he didn't run away. The war veteran transformed discipline into perseverance, fear into focus, trauma into clarity. He slept little, but when he did, he was no longer just haunted. There were also fragmented dreams of something new, a life not defined solely by survival. The emotional climax came when Gordon had to confront his greatest fear, the possibility of losing again. Not his own life, but someone under his protection. When signs emerged that Whitney might be intimidated into silence, Gordon felt the old impulse to solve everything alone resurface strongly. But something inside him resisted. He sought out Aretha. He spoke with Landon. He allowed himself to trust. That was the real turning point. Overcoming adversity wasn't about defeating someone. It was about breaking the cycle. Gordon realized that his strength lay not only in skills acquired in war, but in his ability to choose differently now. He didn't need to be the isolated soldier, advancing alone. He could be the man who builds alliances, who stays, who endures. The final climax occurred in a simple hearing, without an audience, without grand speeches, just facts. Truth spoken aloud. Gordon spoke calmly, without dramatization, but with a firmness that came from someone who had faced worse things than human judgment. As he spoke, he felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because everything was resolved, but because he was no longer running away. When he left the building that day, the sky was open, clear, an almost offensive blue for someone who had spent so much time living in darkness. Gordon paused for a moment on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and realized that something essential had been overcome. Not the trauma, he knew that doesn't disappear, but the control it held over his life. The war veteran still carried scars. He would still have difficult nights. He would still need time. But now there was something new walking beside him. Choice, purpose, connection. He was no longer just a survivor of the past. He was an agent of the present. The climax didn't end with applause. It ended with silence. A silence different from the one that had accompanied him for years. A silence that didn't suffocate, but sustained. Gordon walked through the city, feeling the stares, some respectful, others curious, and for the first time he didn't want to disappear. He had faced his greatest fear. And in doing so, he discovered that the war had not been the end of his story. That had only been the beginning of the most difficult and most human part of it. The conclusion of Gordon's story didn't come as a clean, organized ending, the kind that gives the viewer the false sense that everything finally fell into place. For a war veteran, life never behaves that way. War doesn't teach endings. It teaches continuity. And that's exactly how Gordon realized something had changed. Not because the problems disappeared, but because he stopped running away from them. The following weeks stretched out like new terrain, still unstable, but traversable. Gordon continued waking before dawn, as he had done since the days when danger never slept. His body still obeyed an internal clock shaped by years of conflict. The difference lay in what came after. He no longer woke up with a racing heart. He didn't check doors and windows with the same urgency. He didn't need to convince himself that he was safe. The war veteran was slowly beginning to accept that the battlefield was behind him, even if its scars hadn't disappeared. Sitting at the kitchen table, Gordon watched the morning light stream through the window. The coffee cooled as he remained there, motionless, feeling the weight of his own body in the present moment. For years, that same silence had been unbearable. Now it was bearable, not comfortable, but honest. He didn't need to fill it with noise to avoid thinking. For the first time since returning from the war, Gordon allowed his thoughts to exist without fighting them. The small town in the United States continued its seemingly unchanging routine. Short streets, old shops, familiar faces. To anyone passing by quickly, nothing seemed different. But Gordon knew that real change is almost never visible at first glance. He noticed it in the details, in conversations that ceased when someone said something that would previously have been ignored, in people who now intervened earlier, in glances that carried silent recognition. The war veteran understood better than anyone that collective silence can be as destructive as any explosion. Gordon never sought to be seen. On the contrary, he spent years trying to disappear. Yet his presence began to carry weight. Not the weight of fear, but of conscience. Some people approached cautiously. Others kept their distance. There were also those who simply didn't know how to react to someone who refused to pretend nothing was happening. Gordon accepted it all without resentment. The war had taught him that not everyone is ready to see things at the same time. Whitney moved on with her life, and this was evident in the simplest gestures. Gordon watched her walk down the street with firmer steps, occupy spaces she had previously avoided, exist without shrinking. He didn't treat her as fragile. He knew that excessive care can also imprison. On an ordinary afternoon, she sat on the porch beside him and talked about trivial things. School, the weather, small plans. Not a word about the past. No needs. That normalcy was the clearest sign that something had been restored. Aretha remained constant, not as someone who watches over him, but as someone who understands the other person's timing. She never pressured Gordon to move on. She knew that empty expression is useless for someone who has lived through real wars. Instead, she offered presence. Simple conversations, respected silences. The war veteran learned from her that it's not necessary to fully understand another's pain to walk alongside them. Landon began visiting him more frequently, not as an authority figure, but as someone seeking to learn. They talked about forgotten veterans, about men who returned from war only to face another, silent one, within themselves. Gordon spoke with the calm of someone who had already shouted everything he needed to years ago. He didn't romanticize suffering. He simply told the truth. Surviving is not the end of the mission. Returning home doesn't mean being safe. Connor never left Gordon's mind, but the way he remained changed. Before, it was an overwhelming weight, an unanswered question. Now, it was a vivid memory. Gordon began to speak his name without feeling like he was punishing himself. He began to remember simple, human details that the war had almost erased. The war veteran understood that honoring those who died doesn't require carrying eternal guilt. It requires living with enough purpose for survival to make sense. Gordon began helping other veterans discreetly. He didn't create institutions. He didn't give public speeches. He simply sat beside broken men, listened to stories that came out in pieces, and accepted long silences. Sometimes he said something. Sometimes he just stayed. For many, that was the first time someone hadn't walked away when the pain appeared. The war veteran knew exactly the value of that. For a long time, all he had needed too was for someone to stay. The nights still brought challenges. The past still surfaced without warning. Sounds still triggered automatic reactions. But now, Gordon wouldn't let himself be dominated. He breathed. He observed. He waited for it to pass. He had learned that not every battle needs to be won. Some only need to be acknowledged. The war veteran didn't seek to erase his scars. He had learned to live with them without allowing them to define his every step. On a clear dawn, Gordon walked to the edge of town, where the road stretched out like a silent promise. He stood there for a long time, watching the horizon. He thought about how many times he had believed that disappearing was the only way to survive. He thought about how many times he had been ignored. He thought about how a single detail, the decision not to ignore, had changed everything. Not just for others, but for himself. The war veteran finally understood that he didn't need to be extraordinary. He needed to be present. To stay when the world teaches you to run away. To look when everyone else looks away. To act when silence seems more comfortable. That was true courage. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that sustains humanity. The city never erected a monument to Gordon. There was never a ceremony, but something had changed irreversibly. Because when someone breaks the cycle of indifference, it doesn't close again. The war veteran became a living reminder that war doesn't have to be a man's final chapter. In the final scene, Gordon sits on the porch at night, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky. The wind is light, the house is silent. He doesn't expect perfection. He doesn't expect oblivion. He simply remains, present, alive, human. And the final moral is clear without needing to be said aloud. Not all heroes are celebrated, not all wars end, but sometimes everything changes. When someone who has been ignored decides not to ignore anyone. And if you've made it this far, it's because this story has stayed with you in some way too. So, if you'd like, leave a like on the video, not as an obligation, but as a silent sign that this connection resonated with you. If this type of story, which speaks of humanity, difficult choices and new beginnings, has value for you, subscribing to the channel is the best way to continue receiving content like this, at your own pace, in your own way. I also want to know, if you've been with us all the way through this journey, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." Sometimes, a simple phrase says it all. And when you're finished here, there's a video right next to this that directly relates to this story. Click on it and continue with me there. The journey doesn't have to end now.